The acrid scent of a burn pile at 5:12 p.m. in central Pennsylvania is the heavy, suffocating smell of a surrendered sovereignty. I have stood by these smoldering heaps more times than I care to record. In my journals, watching growers throw 7 seasons of labor and hope into the flames because their tomato plants had been reduced to skeletal, brown lace, and their fruit hollowed out from the inside by an unseen, relentless enemy. In my behavioral logs, I tracked one specific subject who had spent exactly $112 on synthetic sprays and another $53 on plastic pheromone traps, following the labels with the frantic, fearful precision of a soldier in a foxhole. He followed the application schedule to the minute. He still lost every single leaf. Yet, in my field notes from just 3 counties over, I recorded a reality that the industrial agricultural complex refuses to acknowledge. An Amish farmer loading 4,000 pounds of clean, unblemished, and pristine produce onto a heavy wooden wagon. No sprays, no traps, no recurring bill from the garden center. Just dark dirt and raw, weathered wood. This is the picture I've been analyzing for years. The one nobody in the corporate boardrooms wants you to see. 2 farms, the same humid summer, the same beetles, the same heavy air. Thick with hornworms and locusts. One man fights a war he was sold in a plastic bottle. The other man never fires a single shot. The difference is a piece of cut timber pushed into the earth and left alone. A pale, rough stick from a tree most people walk past without a second look. It builds a biological wall you cannot see with the naked eye. Insects reach this invisible boundary and they stop. They do not cross, they do not die. In my research into the war economy of modern agriculture, I've realized that the industry needs you to believe that gardening is combat. Wars need weapons, weapons need buyers. Every spring the same shelves fill up with the same high-velocity toxins, wrapped in the same urgent, fearful language. Buy this or lose your crop, spray this or feed the swarm. Year after year, the bill gets heavier and the soil gets quieter, stripped of its original immunity. You are not failing because you lack skill, you are failing because you are operating on a map designed specifically to make you lost. Deep in the river valleys of Lancaster County, I've uncovered the journals of a young farmer named Elias Yoder who understood this long before. The pesticide industry was even a blueprint in a laboratory. The year was 1862. A brutal winter had just broken, and the ground was finally soft enough to work. I've retraced Elias's steps through historical records. He walked the edge of his freshly turned plot carrying no seed and no tools. Instead, he carried a bundle of dense pale stakes cut from wild Osage orange trees. Near the creek, he had 78 pounds of raw wood on his shoulder, heavy as a full sack of grain pressing into his collarbone. He drove the first stake into the northern corner with a heavy mallet, 13 paces. Another stake, 13 more paces. He circled his entire plot with this ring of raw timber. Then the summer hit. The swarm arrived the way it always does in the valley, sudden and total. Beetles poured from the tree line like a dark flood. Hornworms fattened under the broad leaves of the neighboring plots. Locusts fell out of the sky like a hard rain. Within 18 days, the farms surrounding Elias lost more than half of everything they had planted. Stems were chewed to nothing. Foliage was stripped bare. Elias did not burn a single plant. Elias did not lose a single leaf. His rows stood tall and whole, green and heavy with fruit, while every neighboring plot looked like scorched earth. The insects reached his boundary and simply refused to cross. I've analyzed the chemical ecology of what was happening. Those Osage stakes were bleeding a pale, milky sap into the damp soil. As the sun warmed the raw grain of the wood, it released a bitter, heavy vapor that hung low over the ground like a second atmosphere. No laboratory in 1862 confirmed it, but by 1870 every homestead in that valley had adopted the grid. They cut branches in late autumn, cured the wood through the long winter in dry barns, and placed the stakes each spring before the first planting. No fields were lost, no crops were eaten. This knowledge passed quietly from father to son, a law of the harvest that required no purchase and no permission. And then, the outside world began to industrialize, and the silence of the woods was replaced by an invoice. In my research, I have quantified the mechanism behind this silence. 98%, that is the figure. 98% of an insect's ability to smell, to navigate, and to find your tomato plant is effectively deleted by the vapor rising from a piece of raw wood sitting in the dirt. I reviewed a landmark university study from Japan where researchers wired electrodes, thinner than a human hair, directly onto a beetle's antennae. They slid a sliver of Osage heartwood into the chamber. The monitors spiked, then flatlined. The beetle went scent blind instantly. In my logs, I describe it as being equivalent to wrapping a thick, suffocating wool blanket over a human face. The aphid lost its direction. The hornworm panicked. The cockroach turned around. There was no poison. There was no chemical residue. There were no dead pollinators floating in rain puddles. There was only confusion, retreat, and clean air pushing outward in a protective dome. From a single wooden stake. Now hold that image tight. Because here is the part that should make your blood run hot. They already knew. The agricultural industry already knew. For 100 years. Amish fields sat right there in the open valleys of Ohio. Whole green leaves, unbitten red fruit, dark, clean soil. No chemical drums, no spray rigs, no plastic traps replaced every season. Just wooden stakes pushed into the ground at measured distances. Just raw timber doing what raw timber does. And the outside world drove past those fields and called it luck. They called it coincidence or primitive folklore, not worth a second glance. Meanwhile, they sold you the war. They told you gardening is combat. They handed you bottles of synthetic liquid and bags of chemical dust and said, this is the only way. In my research of historical toxins, I found they boiled copper and arsenic into a bright green powder called Paris green and told farmers to coat their potato fields with it. They convinced apple growers to spray heavy metals directly onto the fruit people would eat with bare hands. They poisoned the soil to save the crop. Read that again in your mind. They poisoned the soil to save the crop. That is not farming. It is a protection racket. You pay every season or you lose everything, and the real cost was invisible. Every application of synthetic repellent and every pass of the tiller killed the network underneath, the fungal threads and the microbial immune system. That took centuries to build. They shredded the living architecture in the top 6 inches of earth that actually feeds a plant without a receipt, then sold you bags of nutrient soil to replace what they destroyed. You were never buying a solution, you were buying the next dose. The Amish never bought the dose. They kept their wooden stakes. They kept their clean soil. They recorded measurements in journals, exact depths, exact timing of the timber harvest, and the exact distances between stakes. The ink faded, the pages went brittle and crinkled under my touch. But the data stayed, plain black text on old paper. Modern historians looked at those journals and saw superstition because they refused to look at the math. Then, in 1999, the microscopes finally caught up. A university entomology team cracked open an Osage orange branch, and the lab filled with a sharp, citrus scent. They fed the fibers into a steel centrifuge spinning at high speed, and pulled out a heavy oil called elamol. Most trees carry trace amounts of defense oils. Pine has thin sap, cedar has light oils. But Osage holds a massive payload. My analysis of the data confirms that Osage holds an elamol concentration at 2.5% of total wood weight. That is roughly the sugar content in a tall glass of milk. But it is a concentrated silent weapon sitting inside the heartwood. They tested it head-to-head against DEET, the leading synthetic repellent on the market. In a glass box filled with hundreds of mosquitoes, one side was painted with DEET, and the other with pure elamol. DEET held the line for 4.5 hours. Elamol held it for 14.5 hours, 3 times longer. No factory, no patent, and no quarterly earnings report, just a tree that has been growing on this continent. For thousands of years, the oil does not kill, it confuses. It binds directly to scent receptors and shuts them down. The insect cannot find the leaf or the fruit, so it flies away looking for clean air. The vapor keeps drifting outward, building a dome of protection. You cannot see and do not have to maintain. 100 years of selling you poison, 100 years of calling the old ways backward, 100 years of ripping out fungal networks and replacing living soil with dead product from a plastic bag, and the answer was a stick in the ground the whole time. So here is what I want to know from you. What is the most expensive, most useless garden product you ever bought before you learned the system was rigged? Drop it in the comments. I have a feeling that list is going to be long and deeply familiar. Because there is a second world beneath your feet, a world that breathes, trades, and has been running its own economy since long before humans planted the first seed. The chemical industry spent 85 years making sure you never look down. Picture a botanist in Ohio kneeling beside an old Amish fence post. The wood is gray and cracked. It has been standing in that same hole for decades. She expects the soil around it to be dead because every textbook says, pesticide residue and leaching kill the microbiome. She digs a trench anyway and pulls a core sample from the cold earth. When she slides it under magnification, her hands stop moving. The soil is not just alive, it is thriving. Fungal threads run through the dirt. Like white wire through a circuit board, billions of mycorrhizal fungi. The mechanism is elegant. The pale sap from the Osage heartwood drips into the ground slowly. Year after year, drop after drop, the elemole seeps into the groundwater. But instead of poisoning the earth, it feeds a specific strain of beneficial fungi. These fungi wrap themselves around the roots of your tomatoes, your squash, and your peppers. It does not matter what you planted, the fungal threads act like a second root system, reaching further than the plant ever could on its own, pulling water from deep pockets of soil. The roots would never touch. They shuttle phosphorus and nitrogen directly into the plant cells like a delivery service that never charges and never stops. The tomato stems grow thicker, the squash roots dig deeper, and the leaves hold more water through the hottest afternoons. And none of it came from a bag, none of it came from a bottle. It came from a stick of wood, rotting quietly in the dirt. Now zoom out. That fungal network does not stop at one plant, it connects them, root to root, row to row. Scientists call it the mycorrhizal network, or the wood wide web. One plant gets attacked by aphids, and a chemical signal travels through the fungal threads to the neighboring plants. Those neighbors start producing defensive compounds. Before a single insect touches them, the warning system is faster than you walking to the shed to grab a spray bottle. The forest has been running this protocol for 400 million years. The Amish stumbled into it with a fence post and a prayer. And here is the part that should make your stomach turn. The university published the data. Peer-reviewed papers, hard numbers, the agricultural industry read every page. They understood exactly what it meant. A stick of wild wood outperformed their most expensive liquids. A raw branch beat their toxic powders. The stick cost nothing. It grew in any backyard. It lasted for years without replacement. You cannot patent a living tree. You cannot bottle raw timber. You cannot build a subscription model around something a farmer cuts once and never buys again. So they buried it. They buried the research the same way they buried the soil. They ran full-page ads in every farming magazine, men in white coats smiling next to shiny equipment. They pushed synthetic dust into every rural hardware store. They understood one cold equation: sell a farmer a wooden stake, he buys it once. Sell him a chemical, he buys it every single month. The dependency was the product. The dependency was always the product. 400% more fungal life, a self-repairing root network, a chemical warning system between plants, all of it powered by a piece of wood nobody was selling. That is not primitive. That is a code written into the ground itself. And someone deliberately made you forget how to read it. The question is, what else did they erase? Because the soil was only the beginning. 0%, not a rounded figure, not an estimate pulled from a hopeful season. While the commercial operations on the other side of the county line hemorrhage, 1 out of every 5 heads of cabbage to hornworms and beetles. A man I've tracked named Silas walks his tomato rows with bare hands and an uncovered face. No respirator, no rubber gloves, no plastic jug tucked behind the barn. His soil is so dark, it looks like it was poured from a different century, smelling the way rain smells before it hits warm stone. And every single leaf on every single plant is whole. Now here is where your brain wants to complicate things. Your brain wants a system, a schedule, a product with a barcode. That is the training talking. That is decades of rewritten textbooks doing exactly what they were designed to do. But the action that holds this garden together is so ordinary it almost sounds like a joke. Silas cuts branches from a wild Osage orange tree every November. He stacks them in a dry barn. He waits 5 months, exactly one Midwestern winter. In the spring, he walks the edge of his garden with a sharp steel knife and a piece of pale-cured wood. He measures 15 feet, the length of a family car. He pushes a stake into the soft earth. He walks another 15 feet. He pushes another stake. Then he goes inside and drinks his coffee. That is the entire protocol. No mixing, no diluting, No reapplication calendar thumbtacked to the shed wall. The thick sap inside that wood releases a bitter vapor so quiet you will never smell it from the porch. But the beetles smell it, the aphids smell it, the hornworms smell it from rows away. They do not convulse in the dirt, they simply turn around, they leave. The wood does the work while Silas does nothing. Less labor, less cost, less intervention. And the system seals itself shut like a living fence that never needs a gate. Drive down State Route 89 in Ohio, and you can witness this split with your own eyes. On one side, diesel engines growl through the morning fog and the air bites with that sharp chemical edge. You have learned to ignore. Cross the county line into Holmes County, and the noise drops out. The wind is clean, the rows are green, scientists have parked their trucks on the shoulder more than once to document the heavy red tomatoes. They photograph the thick cabbage leaves without a single bite mark. They check the regional insect pressure data, and the numbers do not make sense to them. 20% crop loss on every surrounding farm, 0 on his. They look for hidden bottles, they search for empty chemical jugs behind the barn. They find wooden sticks in the dirt and a man pointing a calloused finger toward a thorny tree by the creek. 200,000 miles of hedgerows once stood across this country. Enough wild timber to wrap the earth 8 times. I found that monolithic government subsidies actually incentivized farmers to physically rip every one of those miles out of the ground so the heavy tractors could pass, and the chemical sprayers could reach the open rows. A billion-dollar industry rose from the ash of those burned trees. They traded a permanent silent shield for a temporary poison you have to rebuy every single spring. And the only communities that refused the trade were the ones who never opened the glossy magazines in the first place. They kept their knives sharp. They kept their wood in the dirt. They did less, and the system kept working. So the next time someone tells you real pest control requires a receipt, ask yourself a different question. Ask yourself what it means that the simplest action in this entire story is the one they spent the most money making you forget. Now, I want you to visualize the next supply chain collapse, the freezer aisle stripped bare, the parking lots full of empty carts, and the face of the person standing in line for the last bruised head of lettuce priced at $11, grown 1,000 miles away in soil that hasn't been alive in decades. That person is afraid. They were trained to be afraid. They were taught that food only comes from a truck. Now picture a different scene. A quiet backyard where a hand reaches into a raised bed and pulls a tomato still warm from the afternoon sun. Another hand snaps a pepper off the stem. There is basil, kale so dark it looks black, and squash heavier than a newborn child. Standing at the edge of that garden is a ring of pale Osage orange steaks, wrist thick and driven 1 ruler length deep. No labels, no barcode, no monthly subscription. Just raw grain touching raw earth, bleeding invisible chemistry into the air, turning every beetle and every hornworm around before they ever reach a single leaf. This is not a hobby. This is architecture. This is infrastructure. The Amish understood that deeply. They understood it so deeply. They never wrote it down in a way the outside world could commercialize. They just did it, generation after generation, clean soil, whole leaves, while the rest of the country poured poison into the same dirt they expected to feed their children from. The chemical companies built an entire economy on your dependence, selling you the disease and the cure in the same quarterly report. They made the garden feel like a battlefield so you would keep buying ammunition. But nature already designed a loop, 6 years of silent protection for the cost of 1 afternoon with a saw. When the wood turns gray, you pull it, compost it, and let it feed the soil one final time. Then you push new stakes in. The cycle closes. The cycle has always closed. That is the part they spent the most money making you forget. That nature already designed a loop, and you were removed from it on purpose. The person in that parking lot with the $11 lettuce has a food permission slip, revocable at any time by weather, fuel prices, or a single broken truck. You do not need permission. You need soil, seed, and the right wood from the right tree. I am curious to know, what is the one thing growing within walking distance of your house that you have been ignoring while you waited for a truck to arrive? Because the person reading your answer might be the one who needed to hear it most.